Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the Gifts for Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women of God that use their gifts, passions, desires, and talents to honor and glorify God. As this podcast goes live, we are just 10 days away from Pure Fest. Pure Fest is for folks of all backgrounds and ages. We have performers from all over the country coming to perform. Tickets are just $10 per person or $35 for the whole family of 4 or more people. Tickets are suggested donation and can be paid cash at the door or online at purefest.org. So mark your calendars and invite your friends and family to join us on September 28th, 1 p.m., Crosspoint Church, Lockport, Illinois. Get your tickets and more at purefest.org. And now on to this week's episode of the Gifts for Glory podcast. Our guest is Tracy DeGraaf. She is a comedian, speaker, author, wife, and mother. She got started in comedy later than many, but she's working very hard in making up for lost time. And if you're in the Lockport area this Friday night, look for her show at the Roxy Theater, Life Happens, Laugh Anyway. It's going to be a great show. Links are in the show notes, or look for details at tracydegraaf.com. That's Tracy, T-R-A-C-Y, DeGraaf, DeGraaf.com. And here's my conversation with Tracy DeGraaf on the Gifts for Glory podcast. I am now joined by Tracy DeGraaf. She is a comedian, an author, a speaker, and she is coming to Lockport on Friday, September 20th. And she's bringing her amazing one-woman show. It's going to be a 90-minute show. It's called Life Happens, Laugh Anyway. It's going to be at the Roxy Theater, which if you have not been to the Roxy yet, you need to go. And next Friday is going to be a great chance. And I say next Friday, it's actually this Friday, because as we go live on this podcast on Wednesday the 18th, it's this Friday. You got a couple days to get your tickets. So enough about me rambling about the show. Let's talk to the lady that's going to be the star of the show. Tracy, welcome to the Gifts for Glory podcast. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing great, and I'm really looking forward to Friday to seeing the show. I've heard a lot about you, and just seeing you on Facebook and things is like, this is somebody I want to see, and now I've got an opportunity to see you this Friday at the Roxy. So I'm really looking forward to Life Happens, Laugh Anyway. Friday night at the Roxy. So you're a comedian, you're an author, you're a speaker. So other than Friday, if maybe they've already got plans, what else can people see you getting involved with in the area?
Well, I do a lot of church events. So, the show that I'm doing on Friday in Lockport is a community show. So that's, at a non-church venue. The Roxy is a vintage theater downtown Lockport that's been renovated, and it's so cool in there. The vibe inside of that theater is just really neat. So I definitely wanted to do a community outreach event there. And typically, Dave, what I do is I partner up with the local church, and I do my events in churches primarily. Mm-hmm. And then I'm a breast cancer survivor, so I also do a lot of breast cancer awareness events all around the country, and I partner up with hospitals and breast centers, and we do basically the same thing. We just kind of switch it up. We call it Cancer Happens, Laugh Anyway, and I do most of the same material, but at the end I share my cancer story, and I try to inspire the women in the group to stay current on their cancer screenings. So those are kind of the two little paths that God has me on right now.
Wow. And I want to definitely dive into that, especially the testimony about the breast cancer surviving. But your testimony starts way before that, and it actually starts in the 80s, looking at your website. 1985, when you had to have been like 4 or 5 years old, your website says that's when you came to know Jesus. How did that happen? And kind of tell us what happened that led you to that point back then.
Well, I was actually 19, and I was a freshman in college, and I knew, just about everything. I knew what God was about. I just didn't know that I could have a relationship with him. I had heard of Jesus, obviously. I had been in church. I had seen the Bible, but I didn't own one. I had never read one. And when I was in college, I met up with some students who their priority in life was Jesus. and was the Bible. And I was so attracted to that. I was just like, wow, they're having a great time. They had assurance of their salvation. I thought that was really attractive because everybody knows that you're going to, have that death experience, So I was attracted to their group, and I didn't know that I wasn't saved. I thought I was a good person. I thought I'm a pretty good person. I don't do really horrible things. So I figured I'd go to heaven when I died. But through Bible study and through the Holy Spirit revealing the truth to me, I realized that I was dead in my sin. And that's when I prayed for Christ to forgive me for my sin and take over my life. And I'm so grateful that that all happened when I was a young adult, because so many things are shaped in your 20s. So I was 19 and a brand new baby Christian.
Wow. And I think that kind of a testimony is really great, because especially in our society, when we have it overall so good, it's very easy to get that complacency and thinking like, I'm okay. I don't need to, there's not a desire or that innate instinct to fully commit to God. You think, like you said, I'm good enough. I don't kill anybody. I don't do too many bad things. I'll just get in by default. And I think that sometimes it's even harder to come to Christ when you're in that position of we don't have a lot of those outside challenges. So I think that it's a testimony that a lot of people should understand that everybody needs them. No matter how good your life may be, or no matter what you think, you have to find that commitment and find that personal one-on-one relationship.
Exactly.
So you're in college, and looking at your bio, it looks like that you wanted to be a writer, but you kind of put that on the back burner for a while.
Yeah, I knew what I wanted to be, when I grew up. I knew that when I was in junior high, I wanted to be a writer. I fell in love with writing in junior high, and I did everything that one would do to become a writer. I wrote for my student newspaper all the way from junior high school. In college, I got a degree in journalism, and I graduated from college in 1988 and said, I'm going to be a writer, But then I met my husband, and we got married, and we had our big family of 5 boys in the first 11 years of our marriage. And so I couldn't write. I could barely talk. I was managing a tribe, and I just had to keep putting my career off. And it was so far back on the back burner of my life that I even forgot about my dream of becoming a writer. And it wasn't until I turned 40, when our youngest son went to kindergarten, that I finally said, I'm going to write. And, I was motivated because, sadly, my mother passed away from bone cancer when she was only 51. Uh-huh. And so her life was cut short. And when I was turning 40, I was looking at a picture of my mother when she was in her 40s. And I was like, dang, what if I only have, a short amount of time to live? What if I don't have a lot of time to write? I better get busy. And it was almost as if I could hear my mom's voice saying, if you're going to write a book, you better get going. And that's when I started writing, when I was 40. Wow. And finally had some time, where the boys were all in school. And I wrote my book, Laugh Anyway, Mom. And the irony of it, Dave, is that those 20 years that I was waiting to fulfill my dream or to start writing, God was giving me something to say. Because I didn't have anything to say when I was 22 and I had my diploma in my hand, like, I'm going to be a writer. Well, so you don't know anything. But after you have 5 boys and you're, 40 years old, I mean, you've learned some things. And so that's how my book got launched. It had to wait a long time, but I started writing it then and then published it.
Right. And as somebody that's 22, fresh out of college, you've written some things that were good, but with the family and everything raised in between, it gave you a richness and a better understanding, I'm guessing, and a little bit more wisdom that you can put into what you wrote. It gives you street cred,
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you just don't have enough experience under your belt to have a full understanding. You can read something and comprehend it, but you don't really understand it unless you've got some experience, I feel.
Right. At 22, fresh out of college, you're writing about theory, and at 40, you're writing about experience, which I think is going to attract more people and speak to more people.
Yeah, and I think that it comes through even like in my show now, because my book has actually become my show on stage. That's how that little transition happened. A publishing coach read my book, and he said, "This book is really funny. You should do stand-up and put it on stage." I didn't have the stand-up comedy was not on my radar at all. I never went to a stand-up comedy show. I didn't follow any comedians. I mean, I like to laugh, and I had funny stories in my book, but I had nowhere planned to become a stand-up comedian until that publishing coach came to me and said, "Your book is really funny. You need to put it on stage." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And that's how, we got going with that. So I feel like because I've lived these experiences, I have a genuine authenticity that just comes out. It comes out in my voice. It comes out in my passion, in my message. Just like when I go into the breast cancer awareness events, those women are going to listen to me because I've been there. I mean, if I went to the event and I was just talking about breast cancer, but I had never had it, it's a different talk. It's a different story. Right.
Because you speak with the wisdom of the experience. And like you said, you kind of have the street cred of people will receive that because they're like, okay, she's been through it. She understands what I'm going through instead of feeling like they're being lectured by somebody from the outside.
That's exactly right. Yes.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about, you talked about your family. You talked about, and on your website, you talk about your muffin and your mini muffins. Where does that come from?
Okay, so Muffin is my little pet name for my husband. And I put a bit in my act about that because it's just a funny thing. He's a construction worker. And if you're familiar with Chicago and construction workers, there are not too many of them called Muffin.
Right.
And we've been married now 30 years. And the boys, the 5 boys, we didn't plan all that. We're just really bad at prevention. We just had a horrible, track record of, oh my gosh, here we go again. So the mini muffins just sort of fell in, and then in my bit, I say that Muffin had a new nickname for me after 10 years of popping out a mini muffin every other year. He calls me the bakery. So it's just a fun play on words, and it's just a fun little way for us to communicate as a family.
Okay. I wasn't sure if there was a story involved, but seeing a construction worker and knowing how guys would be like, "Oh, here's Muffin."
Exactly. That's it.
That's cute, and I think that's a solid marriage thing is to have nicknames. I think all marriages need to have nicknames because you can't keep calling each other by their first name. I think that's reserved for when there's an argument.
Yeah, I would agree with that. After all 3 decades of being married, it's a delicate balance of communication. So we have a lot of fun in our family, and we keep things loose, and we make fun of ourselves, and we make fun of each other, and we don't take too much too seriously.
So going back to 2016, that's when is that when you were diagnosed, or is that when you were found to be in remission of the breast cancer?
Both. I was diagnosed and treated in 2016, and I'm not considered in remission yet because I'm 3 years out. So they don't consider you completely in remission until you're 5 years out. Okay. But I'm getting close.
So you get the diagnosis, and was it a complete shock, or have you had a family history of it? How did that diagnosis happen, and what was the result to you and your family?
It was a routine mammogram, and because I lost my mom, not of breast cancer, but bone cancer, when she was so young, as an adult, I have always been very diligent about staying on top of my cancer screenings. So from age 40, and I'm 53 now, so every single year I would get a mammogram without fail. And when I turned 50, that mammogram showed cancer. I was shocked. I was like, no way, it can't be. And I think that that's probably most people's cancer story, you know, this can't happen to me type of thing. Mm-hmm. But I was diligent about those mammograms, and I'm so grateful that I was, because my cancer was diagnosed at stage 1. And if you're going to have cancer, you want to catch it as soon as possible. And that's one of the things that I emphasize when I do my events, my breast cancer awareness events. I'm surprised at the number of women who don't stay current on their mammograms because they say they don't want to know if there's a problem. It's like, you know, an ostrich sticking his head in the sand. He just doesn't want to know. And I say to them, well, if you're sleeping in your bed and there's a fire in your house, when would you like to become aware of it? You know, when it's small and it can be put out with just a little bit of effort, or when you're fighting for your life, because that's cancer. Right. You know, if you can catch it soon, early, then your prognosis is so much easier. And that was the case for me. I only had to have a lumpectomy followed by radiation therapy. So it was a number of months that I was, with radiation therapy, you go every day for a treatment. But it was so doable compared to if it was found like at stage 3 or stage 4. So I'm grateful. I kind of felt like it was a gift, Dave, because it just was a reminder to me, again, that life is short. Nobody has a guarantee. And you better be living for Jesus, doing what he asks you to do, saying what he asks you to say, loving people, things like that.
And it just goes to show how important it is to do that yearly, because if you were going every other year or every 3 years, who knows how quickly it would have grown, because in a matter of a year, you go from nothing to suddenly there is something that needs to be taken care of right away. And I think
that's right.
And I think as we get closer to October, because October's right around the corner, believe it or not, and I know that a lot of people talk about it in October, but it's never too early or too late to start talking about getting those screenings and making sure you're up to date. And this is for men too. Men are shockingly also susceptible. So men need to also pay attention to differences in their bodies as they get older.
Well, and not only breast cancer, but just recently I took my husband to the dermatologist because he's a construction worker and he works outside. He had like some kind of a rash on his arm, and I said, "Oh, you've got skin cancer. I know it." And I took him into the dermatologist, and I said, "Well, while we're both here, we both got mole checks. And I had skin cancer on my nose. I didn't even know it."
Oh, wow.
So I know. I had no idea that one should go. I think the doctor said like once every 3 years or so, you should go and have a mole check done. And that way they found the skin cancer on my nose. All she had to do was burn it off with like some dry ice or something. And we have to keep an eye on it. But there's another thing, skin cancer, and then there's colon cancer. Now the American Cancer Society recommends colon cancer screenings at age 45, not at age 50, because too many Americans were dying between the age of 45 and 50. Because if you get diagnosed with colon cancer, it's pretty progressed. So colonoscopies or the Cologuard test, which is non-invasive, those kinds of things. I mean, we all have to stay on top of our health, because when you let it go and then you have a problem that you could have prevented, you're going to feel bad about that. And I can tell you the only thing worse than hearing someone say you have cancer is telling someone you love, I have cancer, because it hurts. You don't want to see them hurt. Yeah.
And the biggest thing is you don't want to tell them telling them you have stage 1 is it's not easier, but it's not as difficult as saying I have stage 4. So the earlier it's detected, the better. And as I'm hearing you talk, and there's just so many cancers out there that it just makes you think, with all the chemicals that are in our food, with all the the radio waves in the air from cell phones, you got to wonder if all the the way our society is running, if that is contributing to how many are going, how many cancers are out there. And
I don't know, but I do know that the technology for screening and treating cancer has come so far. We just have to stay diligent with the disease and stay on top of it and make sure that we are doing our, being proactive about our own health.
So going back to your diagnosis, was it something that rocked you and made you, was it a faith-building moment, or was your faith strong enough that you just took it in stride? How did that look for you in your family, in your walk?
I would say it was all over the map. At first it was a shock, and I really did cry for 3 days. And I consider myself a fairly strong Christian, and I've been through some difficulties in life, life circumstances and death and, really difficult times. And I consider myself a strong person, but nobody wants to hear that you have cancer. And when they first diagnose you, you don't know what stage you're at. You don't know until they take the tumor out, and then they have to test it. So then your brain is left to go to all these scenarios of, figuring out how you're going to fight for your life. So it was rough for the first few days, but then I just settled in and I said, you know what? We're just going to take it one day at a time. And I kind of found a girl from my church who became like my cancer buddy. And she had been through it. And she just continually encouraged me to just don't get ahead of yourself. Just stay on the step that you're on. Don't worry about chemo. Don't worry about radiation. Just stay on the step that you're on, one thing at a time. Have your lumpectomy and then recover from that. See where you're at after that. So that helped a lot. But it was very much like a roller coaster.
Now, did this happen before or after you'd published your book, Laugh Anyway, Mom?
My book came out in 2009, so my book's been out for 10 years. So it was well after that. Okay.
So let's talk about the book a little bit. I guess we'll be backtracking a little bit. Laugh Anyway, Mom. From what I read on your website, it's basically a collection of stories of you traveling with your boys. Or that's where it came from.
It really covers a lot of different seasons in parenting. So it's like a collection of survival stories of our family life and how we survived. So, for example, the first chapter is about all of our trips to the emergency room. And we've been to the emergency room 24 times. Wow. I know. And we've been questioned but not investigated. So there's a big difference there. And there are a lot of emergency rooms within 30-minute drive of our house. So back in the day when we were going, it felt like every other day, we would just go to a different one. Whatever one we had been to the last time, we wouldn't go there. We'd go to a different one. So it was just, and it's just the funny stories of family life. I have a whole chapter in my book about our holiday mishaps. One year we chopped down a Christmas tree, put it on top of our minivan, and then we tried to go through the car wash because we forgot that it was up there.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's how crazy life can get with 5 little kids, 5 little boys. And then there's 7 chapters in the book. So the first 6 chapters are all just very funny. And then the last chapter is my favorite chapter. It's called the Joy chapter. And it's the story of how one of my boys got sick. And it seemed like everything stopped. We didn't know what was wrong with him. We couldn't get him diagnosed for a while. He couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair. He was in so much pain. And he's better now. He's now healthy, and it was something that he did recover from. But in the moment, when the rug gets pulled out from under you, you don't think about all these things that supposedly drive you nuts, like my kids were drawing on my minivan with rocks. They were drawing circles, putting scratches into my minivan. But you don't think about that when some real big problem comes on your plate. So the final chapter of my book just points the reader to have an eternal perspective and think about Jesus and think about things that really matter. That's why I called the book laugh anyway, even though, and my show is called Life Happens, Laugh Anyway, because that's really the thought, is that even though we all go through these challenges, everybody has something in life that's difficult. It's possible that we can still have joy.
Right. Because being a believer in Christ, we know that no matter what happens in these 80 years, it's going to pale in comparison to what's happening over the next 10,000.
That's right.
And one of the things that I've started to try to think about is basically no matter how painful this life is, it's essentially ripping off a Band-Aid.
Right.
1,000 years from now, the little bit of pain that we go through isn't going to matter. It's just we have to keep that hope and keep our eyes on the long term, which I think raising kids develops that in you even more than anything else, because short term, you hate how your van now looks because it's got scratches in it, but long term, the health of your son is more important than what the van looks like.
That's right.
It gives you a very more of a long-term eternal mindset, which I think is one of the gifts and the blessings in the struggle that God gives us, is teaches us through the struggles that there's more important things than the minutia.
That's right. And sometimes it's hard for us to remember that. So that's what I try to do. In fact, when I do my comedy show, I go in there with the mindset of, I want to help people forget their problems and remember Jesus. That's like my mission, to help them forget their problems and remember Jesus. And with comedy, you can do that, because it's impossible for someone to think about their problems while they're laughing. Their brain is in a state of spontaneous combustion, and it's impossible for that person who is laughing to think about a single problem that they have, because their brain is experiencing all these endorphins and beautiful chemicals that God gave, us. And so I want them to laugh at the comedy, and then at the end, I want them to remember that Jesus is really the source of joy. So that's kind of my motto.
And it reminded me of a quote, one of my favorite comedians, present company excluded. One of my favorite other comedians is Michael Jr. And I heard him give an interview where he said that laughter is a tangible evidence of hope. And that's a quote that inspires me in my comedy. I do improv, which is because I can't write my own comedy. I just can riff and just make it up on the spot. I can't write it out. But improv, it has the same thing of creating moments where audience members are able to laugh, and when they have that laughter, you've now got evidence that there's hope, because now the world's problems aren't so big because they're able to forget them even for a moment.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the beautiful gift of comedy. And in my mind, I can't imagine 13 people, including tax collectors and fishermen, walking around the desert without having laughter. You got to believe the disciples and Jesus had times of laughter together. Oh
yeah, they're human beings, and it's if you think about it, everyone laughs in the same language. We all. It's not like someone who is German or Italian or Spanish or Mexican or American. We all laugh in the same language, and it does the same. It has the same effect on us. And people love to laugh. They love it because they know what that feels like. And if they haven't laughed in a long time, oftentimes I'll have older women at, especially my breast cancer awareness events, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, I haven't laughed that hard in a long time. And it feels good to know that you can give that gift to somebody, give them that experience, because they're not getting it, in their everyday life.
It's a beautiful thing, especially when you see somebody that, because I'm sure you've seen it in your audiences, that there's that one person that comes in and they look like they are automatically rejecting you, but then you see sometime during the show, there's literally a crack up, and then you see just things melt away because they're now they're letting themselves enjoy the moment and laugh.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes the whole show. That's when I'm doing a show, I try to engage the whole audience with eye contact. depending on the room, the setup, and how many people are there and all of that. And I really try to make sure that I'm getting everybody at some point laughing. And my closer joke usually gets them. If I haven't gotten them yet, I just wait for the close, and my closer usually gets them. And I feel a relief because I feel that tension, until they're all with me.
I really enjoyed talking to Tracy, and I look forward to seeing her show this Friday night at the Roxy Theater. But speaking of big shows, Well-Versed Comedy has a huge opportunity coming up September 29th, and perhaps our most ambitious weekend ever. The day after PureFest, Well-Versed Comedy is producing our own show at the Second City in Chicago. And for just $10, you can help us bring live, clean comedy into the heart of Chicago's improv epicenter. I hope you'll join us. Tickets must be purchased in advance. Just visit Second City's website and look for The Decent Comedy Show, or look in the show notes for the link to the show at Second City. There's only 60 seats available, so let's pack the house. Sunday, September 29th, The Decent Comedy Show starring Well-Versed Comedy at Second City, Chicago. I hope you'll join us and bring some really fun, clean comedy to Second City. And we're going to be back in just a moment with more of our conversation with Tracy DeGraaf as we talk comedy, faith, and much, much more right here on the Gifts of Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women of God using their gifts for His glory. As a performer, do you get the same kind of anxiety of if you see somebody that's not enjoying or not laughing? Is that your barometer of if I can get that person, I know I've done a good job? Do you feel like you failed if you haven't gotten that one person?
No, I don't feel like I've failed if I haven't gotten one person, because I feel like if the audience in general laughs where they're supposed to laugh, then I feel like I've done my job. Because who knows what people are going through? You never know. There might be somebody sitting there under the absolute worst circumstances, and they just can't let go of whatever they're thinking about or is on their mind or they're concerned about. So, no, I don't feel like a failure. My first 4 years of doing comedy, I just did a whole bunch of open mics around the city of Chicago, and I did a ton of free events. And I feel like that was like my training for just becoming fearless, because there were so many experiences during those years that were difficult. So it's much easier now.
So these open mics, obviously, there's not a lot of open mic comedy nights at churches. So you were going into, quote unquote, the secular world, bringing this clean comedy, this message of hope through comedy. And I'm sure that you had some really great nights, but I'm sure that there are some challenging nights because people are not necessarily receptive always to that.
Well, it was challenging for me in many ways because, first of all, I was a young comic. It takes a long time for a stand-up comedian to really string together a tight 5 minutes and then 10 minutes and then 15 minutes. That takes a long time. And you can't practice it like, in a room in front of a mirror. You have to practice it in front of a live audience. So, yeah, you're right. I was doing open mics at bars and comedy clubs and at the Moose Lodge, and at a comic book store. Yeah, and it was difficult. And a lot of the difficulty was many of my fellow comics were young men who could be my kids. And the content that they were putting out there was really poor in terms of judgment, and there was more than one occasion when I can think of one time at the Second City, because I did a class there, and so I had like a graduation show at the Second City, and before the show started, one of the young comics came up to me and he said, "I just want to say I'm sorry." And I said, "For what?" And he wanted to apologize to me for the blueness of his content, because he had endeared himself to me like as a motherly figure, because I could be his mother. And all of my comedy was clean and PG and all of that. And he just felt kind of like he was doing a dirty joke in front of his mother is what he felt like. And then I had that happen one other time at an open mic. So I don't know. It was challenging and difficult and I'm still doing it now. I'm still doing open mics because I have new material that I have to work out. I just went and did an open mic in Aurora at the Comedy Shrine, and there they were again, a different set of guys, but they're all young. They could all be my kids, and a lot of content is just, it's that which I wouldn't use, of course, at a church or in a club, but that's the culture that we're in. So, I don't know. That's just the way it rolls, I guess.
Now, my improv group performed at a comedy night in a bar where, everybody but us was doing the blue humor, was doing the innuendo and just the blatant, just the foul stuff. And we got one up there. We're the only performance that did clean comedy. And have you experienced where it's because you're different, you're getting the bigger reaction?
Well, I think that comedy is funny if it's funny, if it's well written and well thought out. So, like, for example, when I just did an open mic a couple weeks ago at the Comedy Shrine, and I'm working on a bit about joining a gym for the first time as a middle-aged woman and the challenges of that. And so I did my bit in front of 15 comics and my best friend. That's who was in the audience. 15 other comics who all could be my son and my best friend. But the jokes got laughs. I mean, not 100% of them because I'm working this bit out, but there were laughs at the points where there were supposed to be laughs because that's comedy. It's the setup and the punchline and the act out and the surprise element, to the joke. So I think that it's okay for me to be squeaky clean PG or G comedy up against, some of this other stuff. I don't know. I just think that comedy, it's more challenging to be clean than it is to be a blue comic or whatever. Dropping the F-bomb or talking about different body parts and so forth. I actually had one comic, this was early on, I think, maybe in years 3 or 4, this guy that I was working with doing shows, he said, "Tracy, you should drop the F-bomb. Nobody would expect it coming from you. Just do it. It'll be funny. It'll be so funny." And I looked at him. I was like, no, the F-bomb, I know what the F-bomb is, and I've thought it, but I'm not going to say it on stage. And I told him, I said, I believe that the F-bomb is reserved for 2 situations. On the battlefield, if you're a Marine fighting for, freedom, drop the F-bomb all you want. I think God understands. Or if you're a mother in labor, let it fly. It's okay. So those are the only 2 times that I think it's okay.
Well, if and when God blesses us with children, as my wife is going into the delivery room, I'll let her know that she's got permission.
Oh, you won't have to let her know. She'll know. It just comes naturally.
So, talking about Life Happens, Laugh Anyway coming up this Friday at the Roxy, is most of your material, is it pretty much just stories based on your kids and being a mom, or how much of it is pulled from other resources or made up?
Well, it's all true material, so it's all my own life experiences. A lot of it is self-deprecating. I never make fun of the audience. I don't like that. I've been to comedy shows where comics will pick out somebody in the audience and make fun of them, and I really don't like that. I just think it's not nice, so I don't do that. So, I do bits about being a middle-aged woman. I have a whole bit about facial hair on women. I have a lot with being overwhelmed with parenting. I have a lot with marriage. And then just observational humor as well, with just observing politics or things around me. I try to stay neutral, in a lot of those hot topics. I don't get too involved with things that would create controversy among people. But basically, I take the audience through the seasons of a woman's life. That's how I describe it. We start out with getting married and having kids, and then gaining weight and growing a beard, and then you meet Jesus. That's sort of my little tagline.
That's awesome. So what I usually do, and I mentioned to you before we started recording, is I'll end each interview with an interrogation where I ask 7 questions just to see what we can dig up about you that we don't already know. So if you're ready, okay, we'll start the interrogation, and no wrong answers. And if there's a question that maybe you don't want to answer, you can also always pass. There's no pressure.
Okay.
So first question is, with your boys, you went to a lot of ERs. Were the 24 visits equally distributed among the 5 kids, or was there one that went more than others?
Oh, no, we definitely had my youngest son. He just seemed like he was going all the time. He swallowed a nickel. He shoved rocks up his nose. He broke his arm. He was just all over the place. So it was probably between him and his next brother that was just above him. So brothers number 4 and number 5, those 2 were probably the worst.
Okay. Now, what was your, in all the places you've traveled, what's been your favorite place to visit?
I did a show in Dothan, Alabama. I had never been to Alabama. And my best friend and I drove down there, and we had a blast. We just had so much fun experiencing Southern culture. We experienced a lot of the Southern food. This was a breast cancer event that I did for a hospital down there. And then we drove from Dothan, we drove to the Emerald Coast, right there in Florida. And I have never seen that area of the country. I had never seen the beaches there. The sand is like sugar. I don't like the beach. I don't like the sun. I'm very pale, and I don't sit at the beach or anything like that. But when we got there and I saw the sand like sugar, and the water looked so green and beautiful, it was absolutely stunning. So that was probably my favorite trip.
Nice. Who do you credit as your comedy influences?
I would say for sure my dad. My dad is hilarious. He's Irish, and he can tell a really good story. And I believe that a big part of my storytelling comes from him, with timing and things like that. I love Irma Bombeck. I love her writing. I love Phyllis Diller, and Phyllis Diller actually endorsed my book before she passed away. So she was a very kind woman to give me the time of day and endorse it. So yeah, I love all of that.
Awesome. What's your biggest fear when you're on stage?
I get very nervous before I take the stage. I pray a lot. I just ask God, make me funny, make them laugh, have the crowd be with me. You know how it is when every audience has an energy to it, every room has an energy to it. So early on, I used to think that I was going to forget, and I did forget. Oftentimes, I would forget a punchline, or I would forget a whole joke. Now that I've been seasoned a little bit, I feel much more confident that even if I forget, it's okay, because this audience, they don't know that you forgot something. And as long as you're making them laugh, it's okay. So I've learned to just be okay with not being perfect, with not having everything, just memorized. Just go with the flow and let the audience experience, the content.
So a follow-up to that one, what do you do when you forget, or if you miss a joke, or you don't forget how to get to the punchline?
Sometimes you just have to let it go, because if you're past the point of no return and you can't get the setup back, you're done. You just move on. That's happened to me, and I actually had that happen to me when I was recording something, and I couldn't get it back. That was it. So you just roll with it.
Okay, I think you mentioned earlier that you know that when you have your closer joke, that's kind of the one you're looking forward to. That may be your strongest, but what is your favorite joke to tell?
Probably, I have two favorites. So I have the true story of how I forced my husband to have a vasectomy. That is a true story, and it is very funny. It's also in my book. And then I have another bit that I do that is a true story of how I woke up one Sunday desperate for Jesus, but we were late to get to church, and long story short, we didn't have any clean underwear. So I tricked my husband into thinking that he was putting on clean underwear, but they were actually dirty because there was no laundry clean. And so he went to church wearing dirty underwear, and the reveal comes when we were driving in the car. He was upset, and he was kind of like a passive aggressive conflict resolution person. So I knew he was upset, but he wasn't saying what he was upset about. And then he let me know that he knew that the underwear were dirty, that I tried to trick him. But I needed to be with Jesus. I needed to be in church. So those two bits. And my poor husband, he's such a good sport. And, I would never share any of this if he wasn't the man that he is. But he's such a good sport, and he gets it that family life can be very challenging.
So when the first story about your husband and forcing him to get the procedure, do you ever joke, or does he ever joke asking you to cut that from the act?
No. He thinks it's fun and funny. I mean, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be doing comedy at all, because I've been doing it now for 10 years. And if I had to put a roof over my head and food in my mouth, I wouldn't be doing it, because I haven't, created enough of an income for a career like that. I would have to do something else. Mm-hmm. So if not for his encouragement and his stick with it and don't quit and keep going. And he drove me to all the open mics and all the stuff, in the beginning. So he's 100% a huge support. And he's funny too. He's really wicked funny. He would never take the stage. But he's very funny.
Nice. All right. Question number 6. If you had the chance to do one thing over again, what would that be?
That's a really good question. If I had a chance to do one thing over again, what would it be? I really don't know. I'm going to have to think about that for a minute. I wouldn't change anything I was thinking about this the other day in terms of the challenges in my life have created a strength in life. So I wouldn't change any of the challenges in my life. Like I see my cancer as a gift. So I'm grateful for that. Gratitude is huge, and it's something that I practice every single day. My best friend and I send each other a list of the top 10 things we're grateful for every day, and we've done it since 2011. And it has literally changed our lives. We're grateful. Every day we send 10 things that we're grateful for that day, every single day at the end of the day. We call it our 10. And we've done it since 2011. And it started out because we were depressed. Bad situation going on in life. Family life was a mess. Everything was a mess. And we started doing this thing. So I don't really have regrets. I think that's maybe why it's hard for me to answer your question, because I've learned to be grateful no matter what, I don't know if I would say that if something really, really bad comes into my life, it might be tougher for me. But for right now, I can just say gratitude has changed. It has changed my attitude. That rhymes. Gratitude has changed my attitude. So I really can't answer that one.
That's your next T-shirt for your merch table.
Yeah, there we go.
Now, is there a rule with when you send your 10s that you can't use each other as any part of the 10? Like you can't say, I'm thankful for you, I'm thankful for your smile, I'm thankful for your laughter. Or is it okay?
No, we can say whatever we want.
Okay.
We can say whatever we want. So when we started this in 2011, we didn't think we would be doing it in 2019. We really didn't. We didn't think we'd do it for the rest of our lives. but it has had that much of an impact that it's now just ingrained in us, and we do it every single day. And it's a joy, because then I get to read what she's grateful for, and she gets to read what I'm grateful for. And then we end it with the sentence of, I know. So we make a sentence of, I know, like, what do you know? What do you know for sure? Like, I know God is good. Something I know. Let's see, what's the next one? I know I can, so I can change, or I can do better on something, or whatever. So an I know statement, an I can statement, and I'm excited about. I'm excited about tomorrow. I'm excited about sleeping. I'm excited about whatever. I'm telling you, Dave, it's changed us. It's like a miracle, but it's been years,
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I don't know if you've ever thought about including it in your act of having every lady in the crowd when you're doing like these women's nights or these breast cancer nights, and say, find a partner, and you pick out who your 10 partner is going to be, and start this. And I don't know if that would be something you want to include in your show, or if that's something that you just want to keep to yourself with you and your best friend. But it just popped in my head that that'd be a great part to end the show, or as part of your show, is find your 10 partner.
Yeah, I've done a fair amount of speaking, especially at churches, and have encouraged people to do this sort of thing. I've tried to encourage close friends to do it, to find a buddy and do it. I'm writing a book. I'm actually writing a series of books. It's going to be the Anyway series. So like my first book was Laugh Anyway. This book will be Grateful Anyway. I have another book called Pray Anyway. So yeah, it'll be part of that. Nice. when the book comes out. Yeah.
All right. So the final question I wanted to ask on the interrogation part was, if you could pick any comedian, living or dead, in any venue, what would be your dream show to be a part of?
I'm a huge fan of Kathleen Madigan. I love her. She's a secular comedian. She's from St. Louis. She's blue collar. She's hilarious. She imitates her dad, and her imitating her dad reminds me of my dad. My dad's Irish. Kathleen Madigan is Irish. I just adore her. I love her style. I've seen her in concert, at her show. She does, sometimes drops an F-bomb here or there, but I just love her. I just think she's just hilarious. So she'd be my favorite.
And what venue would you like to perform at if you could do a two-lady show with Kathleen Madigan and yourself?
Oh, I think it would be great fun to be in the Rialto in Joliet. Have you ever been there?
Oh, I've been there a couple of times, yes.
I love it there. Yeah, so let's make that happen.
Well, let's book it. Obviously, not too close to Friday night, because we want to pack the Roxy this Friday night, the 20th, for Life Happens, Laugh Anyway. The tickets are available on your website, TracyDeGraaf.com. That's 2 A's and 1 F, TracyDeGraaf.com. And Tracy, I thank you so much for being a part of the show on the Gifts of Glory podcast. And we hope that you have a packed house Friday night, and that big things happen as you continue to use your gifts to speak to people and bring them closer to the cross of Christ.
Well, thanks so much, Dave. I really appreciate it.